A dance that one day each and every one of us will dance. The dance takes place in a grand ballroom with a fabulous orchestra. The orchestra, I think, actually plays whatever song that the dancers themselves want to hear. And even though I've been to so many of these events, and even though I have the routine down pat, even so, I don't think I can actually recall a single tune ever played by one of the orchestras. You see, you can attend one of these events as a guest of the dancers. You might just end up in the gallery watching someone you know or love is dancing, but you don't get to dance yourself until either it is your turn or you've been invited to be a dance partner with someone you love. You know, it just might be true that only the dancers themselves actually recognize the song that the orchestra is playing. When it is my turn to dance, I want to dance with the person I've loved most in this world. And if it is her turn first, I want to be her dance partner, and I want us to dance a waltz, a slow, elegant, flowing, beautiful waltz, 2, 3, waltz, 2, 3, waltz, 2, 3. Now this dance is no small production, mind you. And the ballroom is no ordinary ballroom. It has very, very high ceilings, a beautiful, long, highly polished blonde wood dance floor, and brilliant spotlights. There's a platform off to the side that's large enough for a good-sized orchestra of 40 or 50 or more musicians. The lights over the dance floor are so brilliant that the edges become indistinct as they meld into the blackness of the ballroom. Standing in the center of the dance floor, looking out into the darkness of the ballroom, the dancers can just make out silhouettes of people, of everyone you've ever met, ever known, ever loved in your entire life, waiting to watch you dance. The actual dance. Oh, I know. There are billions of people on this earth. And there must be millions of these events each and every day. Yet each dance is unique, designed, if you will, for the specific dancers. The most amazing thing, though, is the orchestra. You see, the orchestra itself doesn't even exist until it's needed. And as an orchestra is needed, somehow musicians then enter the ballroom, to which they are called, winding their way through the shadowy figures of a lifetime that surround the dance floor. One by one they appear, suddenly popping out of the darkness into the brilliant spotlights, walking slowly across the dance floor, mounting the orchestral riser. A violin, a cello, a bass, a clarinet, a flute, followed by a piccolo player, then another clarinet, even a giant harp. On and on until all the musicians are seated. They open their cases in what seems like slow motion. And then the room is filled with that familiar cacophony of an orchestra warming up before a performance. Yet at any point in this ritual, it is not too late. The end is not yet written. An orchestra, even in the middle of its warm-up, can suddenly stop. The musicians return their instruments to their cases and exit the ballroom, a false alarm, so to speak. And if it is not a false alarm, then the orchestra finishes its warm-up. It begins to play that song that the dancers themselves wanted to hear, which only they recognize. The actual dance begins, and it can be wonderful and intimate and beautiful. And as the breathing becomes slower and shallower, the sound builds and the dance becomes intense. And then the breathing becomes even slower and softer. And the dance becomes more intense and even more intense, and then it stops. There is an end to the music. There is an end to the dance. The musicians return their instruments to their cases and dissolve into the blackness of the ballroom, disappearing until they're needed somewhere else again. The ballroom sits achingly, intolerably empty, silent, almost in black and white. Hollow. It's the spring of 2000, and it's the first time ever that I experience an orchestra forming. And I have to admit, it scares and it confuses me. It all begins with Susan updating me about her annual checkup. Everything's fine, Sam, she tells me. And then almost as an afterthought, a classic Columbo moment, if you will. Oh, and just one more thing, Sam. The doctor wants me to see a surgeon to check out something she felt in my right breast. Now, honey, she doesn't think it's anything to worry about. It just felt funny to her. Well, I'm surprised. But I'm not worried. After all, it's going to be Susan's 4th breast biopsy. Don't worry, dear. Remember, you had a mammogram just 2 months ago, and it was normal. Here. Let me see if I feel anything. Humor and sex fixing. Everything. This biopsy, unlike the 3 previous ones, is going to be done as an outpatient procedure in one of these modern surgical centers found in shopping malls everywhere. I remember what they used to be like. Breast biopsies, that is, back in the good old days of 80s and 90s. They were really terrible. First of all, they were all done in hospital operating rooms under general anesthesia. The surgeon would remove some breast tissue and do what they call a frozen section. That is, they would take the breast tissue and look at it under a microscope right then and there in the operating room. And if the tissue were positive, off would go the breast. Pretty traumatic stuff back then. This time? Well, this time we're introduced to a young surgeon by the name of Dr. John J. Morgan. He is young, and he's already listed as one of the top doctors in the Washington, D.C. area. He has a very reassuring manner in everything he does. I eventually nicknamed him Dr. Happy, because he's always so friggin' optimistic. Good news, it's just old scar tissue from your previous biopsies. Don't worry, there's no tumor, there's no cancer, I'm sure of it. We got to get a copy of the lab report back, but I am not concerned in the least. It's just old scar tissue. I don't think I realized just how worried I am until I almost cried with joy at the news. Poor Susan, she's still looping from the mild sedative they gave her, and I can't really hug her with that IV sticking out of her hand. Now, Susan never indicates that she's worried, or if she is, she's not admitting it to me. She's always very matter of fact. Why should I worry, honey? There's nothing I can do about it. Now, Sam, if it had been positive, we would have dealt with it then. Well, back to work, back to normal. We didn't bother to tell anybody about the breast biopsies, so we don't have to make a bunch of phone calls. After all, this is 2000, and most people still on that email or texting, and Susan insisted that we not say anything to anyone unless there's an issue, and well, there isn't. That is, there isn't until the telephone rings 3 days later. Susan Simon? Yes, this is Dr. Morgan's office. Could you come in tomorrow? We've got the lab report back. Good. Sam should come with you. The first time we visited Dr. Happy's office, we were in an exam room. This time we're invited into what seems like a closet. It's small and narrow. There's barely enough room for 3 people. A built-in desk is really just a small protrusion from the wall. It sits empty as 3 people situate themselves around it. There's not much conversation right now, just an awkward silence with awkward motions, a scooting the chairs. Dr. Happy is reluctant to start. all of a sudden, I'm watching this scene unfold from above it. The only other time in my life I've ever had an out-of-body experience was when I was having my tonsils out and I was 6 years old. I can remember from back then looking down from above my back, almost touching the ceiling as the doctors talk about me and work on me while I'm still out. Or at least that was my dream. Today, though, I'm not wearing an ether mask. I'm not being operated on. And I am not dreaming, though I wish I were. I'm actually sitting right there facing the wall. I'm at the rounded end of the small protrusion. Dr. Happy's to my left. Susan is to my right, facing Dr. Happy. 8.5 by 11 lined piece of paper sitting in the center of the small protrusion with Dr. Happy's crude drawing on it. A breast with X's and lines. The shaded area where the lump had been taken for testing. Something else is happening, and I don't know what it is. Premonition? A sound? No, not a sound, an image. I wonder whether at the exact moment that the doctor began to talk, that the universe itself had noticed that it might be time for an orchestra to perform, and that I, Samuel Allen Simon, the husband of Susan, for 33 of my 54 years, that I might have noticed, that the universe has noticed. The only thing I do know is something is terribly, terribly wrong, and the depth of that wrongness extends beyond the here and the now. It extends into the eternal, the stuff of primordial creation. And in that precise instant that the words were uttered, all of those unknowable parts of the unknowable and unseeable universe shifted and changed. And they somehow let me know that everything is now different. The doctor's words, they're strange, a new vocabulary that I don't understand immediately, though their import is clear to me. Stage 3. Why stage 3? Well, because of the size of the tissue of cancer, because there are no margins. Margins? What are margins? Now remember, we didn't actually find a tumor, he reminds me. We just removed some breast tissue. Now a margin would have been where the cancer ended, and normal and healthy breast tissue began. And when we took out of Susan, I'm afraid there was no normal, healthy breast tissue. And stage 3, because there's 2 kinds of breast cancer, I learned. There's cancer that it's called in situ, that it sits, if you will, inside the breast ducts, but not in the tissue that surrounds the ducts. And then there's invasive, that is, the cancer has invaded the tissue that surrounds the ducts. Susan has both. Any one of these 3 conditions, the size of the tissue with cancer, absence of margins, and both kinds of breast cancer would qualify for stage 3. And of course, Susan has all 3. Stage 3, Q. Well, I now know what these words mean. You see, Susan's mother died of metastasized breast cancer at the age of 56. Susan is 54. I understand that the outcome is inevitable. The universe is noticing more intensely now. My soul or essence can feel the change. It's as if the barometric pressure of the universe has changed. The first ever images of an empty, grand ballroom appear deep in my mind's eye. I don't know what to do with them. They're all part of a veil of darkness that sits behind my head and my heart. I now know what I have to do. I now know the journey I'm on. I've traveled this road before. This is not the first time. 1 grandfather, 2 grandmothers, 4 aunts, 2 uncles, Susan's father, my sister, Susan's mother, My mother. My mother. It was 27 years ago. I was only 28 years old. It could have been yesterday, that night in the George Washington University Hospital in 1973. Mom lying in a bed in a semi-private room, going in and out of consciousness, delirious sometimes. She was dying of metastasized breast cancer to her brain, and we, the 5 children, previously agreed not to take extraordinary measures. 2 nurses stood at the side of it. I stood at the foot of the bed. I was the only other one in the room. My older sister Evelyn was supposed to join me, but she didn't make it in time. I didn't know what to do. I was supposed to be strong. The only boy with 4 sisters. Dad, a traveling salesman, and he had died 3 years earlier when I was just 25 years old. Now, I am the man in the family. I'm supposed to be strong. Well, I was not hearing an orchestra playing back then. I just listened as the 2 nurses, each holding a wrist from the opposite side of the bed, counted down, and as I heard them say, "She's gone." My eyes filled with tears. And as I began to turn away from the bed, I noticed out of the corner of my left eye a giant swirl, a spinning tuft of a cloud. And at the speed of light, my head jerked from left to right as the tuft spun out of the room. And in that instant, I knew exactly what it was. I knew. And I couldn't tell anyone, even Susan. You see, it was my first experience with the supernatural, and I was afraid. I was afraid because I just saw something I knew I was not supposed to be able to see. And I do know what you call them. People who hear and see things in their head that nobody else can hear or see. Well, that was in 1973. I have since come to understand that life exists in each of us in a tangible form, and that the essence of who we are, beyond this physical body, exists. And I was privileged to experience that life force exit my mother's body at her last breath. And now, 27 years later, in the year 2000, it is my sacred obligation to take Susan on that same journey. I just don't know if I can do it. I get nauseous at the prospect of coming to Susan through her end of days. Susan? You want to know about Susan? It's like we live on parallel planes of the same universe. She's not experiencing the universe shift. She's not even reacting outwardly to the news. Dr. Happy says that she needs a mastectomy, and I'm the one who asks about the other, the left breast. Clearly, there's no way to know if there's any cancer in the left breast, because there wasn't even a tumor in the right breast. There was just cancer. So we all agree, a double mastectomy. Dr. Happy wants to do it soon, and he says we should begin looking for an oncologist. Well, we need to make some phone calls now. The universe may know what has happened, but we have to let everyone else know. The first time I cried is later that afternoon when we called the temple. We're home, and the rabbi's out of town, so we're put through it to the cantor. And all of a sudden, I can't talk. I cannot say those words. So I hand the phone to Susan, who calmly and matter-of-factly tells him about the diagnosis and that she'll be having surgery. He asks if it's all right if he puts Susan's name on the Mishnah Berurah list, and we say yes. You see, it's a tradition in our Reformed Jewish synagogue for the rabbi to read out loud at Kabbalat Shabbat, that's Friday night services, the names of congregants who are ill. The congregation then chants a prayer, asking God for the healing of body and of soul of those who are in need of such healing. As it turns out, or so it seems, Susan's body and my soul need healing. So on that Erev Shabbat, Friday night, Susan and I are sitting in the sanctuary in the same seats we've been sitting in for the last 27 years, listening to other people's names read out loud. We're holding hands as Susan's name is read out loud for the first time, and we chant with the congregation, Mishaberach. Mishaberach ihimotenu mikor habraha leavotenu. Bless those in need of healing with refuah shalema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say, Amen. Names are read out loud in the order in which they're added to the list. So Susan's name is read last, and Susan Simon. We squeeze our hands tighter. My eyes tear again. Susan is stoic. Afterwards, I stand back and watch as Susan's friends come up to her. Why's your name on the list, Susan? Hey, Sue, why's your name on that list, honey? I watch her hug and be hugged. I tear up again when Sharon and Susan put their foreheads together. Susan says, breast cancer. And in that moment, I expect Susan forehead to forehead with her friend to now break down. And instead, it is me who sees in that moment not a beginning, but an ending. And once again, I cry. I don't know what to do with him. We just sit in silence. Not even small talk. Want some water, some coffee? Dr. Happy comes out to tell me that Susan is in recovery and I can go down now. She's doing as well as could be expected, given the extensive double mastectomy. Tissue's been sent off to the lab for tests, and the results will be available in about a week. I wave goodbye to everyone in the waiting room, and I head down for what's going to turn out to be a very long 3-day and night vigil. I can't explain why, or maybe better said, I cannot justify why, but I cannot leave Susan alone. I cannot imagine Susan going through this alone. Now, my job is to be here with her in this room. My cot sits near the floor on the right side as you face the bed. In the opposite corner, on the same side of the room, I've set up a small chair and a table with a computer, so I can work and be here at the same time. Now, Susan doesn't react well to the anesthesia. She's nauseated all the time. So I hold out one of these small, semicircular metal pans for her to throw up. I steady her as she gets up to go to the bathroom with the IV stand and bandages and these 2 small plastic bulbs hanging off of either side of her chest that are filled with a red liquid that I will soon learn how to empty. I don't want to be here. I don't do this stuff well. Hell, I barely changed the kids' diapers and now I'm helping Susan vomit. I really, really do not want to be here. And yet, I don't know where else I could possibly be. But all of a sudden, I find myself standing in the center of a grand, empty ballroom. Not quite sure where I am in relation to everything else that's here. At first, I think it's a nightmare, but I'm not asleep. Daydreaming? The ballroom sits empty. I'm the only one here. Yet it has a very specific purpose, this empty, grand ballroom, and I know what it is. It's waiting. It's waiting for Susan. For Susan and me to step out onto the dance floor. It's 3 days later, 7 in the morning, and Dr. Happy is making his rounds. Susan has slowly and steadily recovered her strength and stability in this very short period of time. We're enjoying walking around the 7th floor, the cancer floor, with Ivy stand in tow. Sometimes as we're walking, I secretly root for Susan to race past the other cancer patients who are doing the same thing. This morning, Dr. Happy is living up to his nickname. He's just full of good news. Got it all, Susan. Got it all, Sam. First of all, there was very little additional cancer in the right breast. And in the left breast, we found nothing. But the best news of all, and he tells us that this next item is actually based on the lab looking at lymph tissue under a microscope during the surgery. And the best news of all is that the lab found no cancer in Susan's lymph nodes. He's almost ecstatic. He's so happy. And indeed, this last item is the best news of all. You see, for breast cancer to metastasize to other organs in the body, it needs to travel through a series of lymph nodes. And so the lab tests those nodes for evidence of cancer. And if they find them, there's a very high probability that the cancer is contained to the breast area. And if they do find cancer in the lymph nodes, there's an equally high probability that the cancers travel through the nodes and spread throughout the rest of the body. Well, at least that's what Susan and I are told. So hearing that there's no cancer in Susan's lymph nodes is for me like turning everything I've come to know on its head. Maybe this isn't a death sentence after all. We're home, and I get a copy of the lab report in the mail, and there it is, in black and white. No cancer evident in the lymph nodes. Well, there's the fine print, blah, blah, blah. The diagnosis is subject to getting a chemical report. It'll be available later, blah, blah, blah. It doesn't register. My eyes just glaze over that fine print. And in fact, shortly after getting that report in the mail, I actually run into Dr. Happy in the parking lot of the local grocery store, and he gives me a thumbs up. He does seem to be a man who expected the worst and got the best. He is delighted with the news, and he's delighted with how things have turned out. Me? Well, I'm still struggling with what I come to understand as an inevitable journey with Susan. With the possibility that everything might just turn out okay. Well, relatively speaking, but okay. So here we are the next week, and we visit Dr. Happy's office for the first post-surgery routine checkup. Dr. Happy is not looking so happy. And once again, he's reluctant to start. We've got the chemical report back, and I'm afraid that the lab actually found extensive cancer in Susan's lymph nodes. They tested 17 nodes, 10 had evidence of cancer. There's more hesitation in his voice. And the lab says they made a mistake in the first place. See, they went back, I had them go back and look at the slides, and the cancer was actually evident in the tissue that they looked at during the surgery. They just missed it. So we're home again. And I get a new report in the mail. And on the back page are words that I don't think I'm going to ever forget. On further review, the diagnosis has changed. Well, the diagnosis may be changed for them, but it's not for me. You see, I never really believed that first report. I've already figured out what this bone means. There's not going to be a good outcome here. All of this is just a precursor to the main event, the actual dance. And there's more news from the chemistry of Susan's breast cancer. I learned that there are chemical markers that are indicators of the likelihood of a cancer's recurrence or spread. And with the cancer in Susan's lymph nodes, I remember that it has traveled through those nodes and spread throughout the rest of Susan's body. The chemical markers, though, will tell us whether the cancer spread could be slowed by medicine. So if the tissue markers are positive, then the cancer spread can be suppressed by drugs like tamoxifen. But if the tissue markers are negative, there are no drugs to slow down the cancer spread or recurrence. And all of Susan's markers are negative. Tamoxifen is useless. Everything is clear now. I'm still in the ballroom, but now I'm standing in the center of a dance floor. I can barely breathe. The musicians that are going to play the music for a dance are now entering the ballroom. Everything is indistinct except for the brilliant lights over the dance floor. Time is frozen as one musician after the other walks slowly past me. A violin, a cello, a bass, a clarinet, a flute, followed by a piccolo player, then another clarinet, even a giant harp. One by one walking past me as if I don't even exist. Yet they each know their task. They each know the song that they're going to play for a dance, even though Susan isn't even here yet. In the normal world, I'm with Susan in the doctor's office. It's our first visit with the oncologist we think we're going to select. Strangely, or at least strange for me in this breast cancer ritual, the oncologist is not selected until after the surgery is performed. Dr. Blonder comes highly recommended by a number of our friends. How do you pick a cancer doctor? This is not an easy question. I soon learned that a lot of our friends have or have had cancer, or they know people who have or have had cancer, and they all swear by their own doctors. No two people seem to use the same doctor. Well, I know what I want to do. I want to break the story, stop the unstoppable, make the inevitable evitable, and maybe, just maybe if we go somewhere else, things will turn out differently. Our interview with Dr. Blonder is not going very well. I'm challenging him from the start. If we don't do something different and radical out of the box, I know how the story's going to end, don't you? And once again, in the middle of our discussion, I cry. Susan comforts me. Despite my desperate urge to find somebody, anybody, who will change everything now. I know it's not my decision. I don't get to choose. My job is not to be the director. My job is to be the supporter. I am the other half of that which makes us, Susan and me, complete. And when else in our lives is it more important to behold than when her body is badly broken? So Dr. Blonder it is. Susan's choice. We arrived for the first checkup shortly after he is selected. Sitting in the waiting room, we run into friends. We didn't know that Heidi had been sick. She looks just awful. The hour and out into the waiting room is dark. The nurse comes out to take Susan to the exam room, and I insist on being in the exam room with Susan and Dr. Blonder. How strange is it to watch as another man puts his hand on Susan's bare chest. His finger is running along the lips of the incision point when all of a sudden he stops. He doesn't say anything, he just does a military-style about face, walks to the opposite wall and picks up the phone. Now that is strange. I wonder if he was paged. He walks back to tell us that he's found a lump on Susan's chest at the incision point and it needs to be looked at right away. He's made an appointment for us for the next day with Dr. Hackey, the surgeon. That is what he was doing on the phone, and he is not happy. And I am not happy. It's early on this Sunday morning after we found the lump on Susan's chest. I tend to walk around the house on these early Sunday mornings wondering, what is it going to be like being alone? Never lived alone in my life. I went from almost finishing college to getting married and living with Susan. Susan Merrill Cowles. That's her maiden name. I can remember the first time I ever even noticed Susan. We hadn't met yet. She's living in Houston and I'm living in El Paso. Yet we both belong to the same B'nai B'rith youth organization groups. Me, the one for boys called AZA in El Paso, and Susan, the one for girls called BBG in Houston. We were just 16 years old, and we were traveling with our respective youth groups to the same regional convention in Texarkana, Texas. Oh, I remember this girl with curly black hair and big braces on her teeth. I kept noticing her in that 16-year-old boy sort of way. And I may have stared at her a lot, but I never got up the guts to introduce myself to her before the convention was over. So here I am, standing in the center of the bus, getting ready to go home. And I really do remember this. I look out the bus window, and there's Susan waving at the bus. And I wonder, is she waving at me? She later said that she was. We decided we wanted to get married. And immediately, both sets of parents strongly objected. We were obviously too young, still in college. Wait a while, dear. Meet some other girls. Now, honey, if it's true love, you'll get back together again. All the way across the vast expanse of Texas, from Houston to El Paso. Both sets of parents had the exact same reaction at first. But Susan's mother was sick, and it was becoming apparent that she was not going to survive her breast cancer. I think that the decision to let us get married was more about wanting Susan's mother to see her youngest daughter wed, and thinking it's a good idea for two 20-year-olds to get married. So in August of 1966, while we were still in undergraduate school, we got married. I moved out of my family home into our first apartment near campus until we finished college. So here I am, 34 years later, just walking around the McLean, Virginia home on this early Sunday morning, wondering whether it's going to be like this every morning. The rabbi to her car, and I do thank her for her time, but I don't tell her about the voices or the orchestra. The orchestra is practicing now. I'm scared and confused by the sounds and smells and images. I can hear the orchestra practicing more clearly by the hour. It is real and it is everywhere. I can hear the orchestra practicing as clearly as I hear anything else. I don't understand why other people don't hear it. I need to talk to someone else. So I make an appointment with a psychiatrist I've been seeing every now and then for the past 20 years. It's been a while. He invites me into his office, which is familiar, much the same as it's always been. I sit down for what's going to turn out to be our only session, and once again, all of a sudden, I cry. I tell him about the orchestra and the ballroom and the dance and how real it is to me. Secretly, I'm afraid I might be losing my mind, and I wonder, no. I hoped that he will give me medication. He did that the last time I was going through a transition, and I think that the medication will remove the images, erase the orchestra, and change the future by changing what's going on in my head. And instead, he calls it a metaphor, and he says that it's beautiful. It never occurred to me that the dance was beautiful. I've always feared it again. It's tragic and it's devastating. His words have a dramatic effect on me. Beauty, dignity. Rather than fearing the inevitable dance, I think I'm going to be able to get ready for the dance. I now understand that the actual dance will be the ultimate consummation of our love. It only takes Melvin a few days to get here. He arrives on the Thursday afternoon. We have to check into the hospital at 7 a.m. the next morning. Dr. Happy will remove the lump and if need be, send it off for analysis. No one's saying it, but if the lump is cancer, as everyone expects it to be, Susan's prognosis is grim. Susan checks into the hospital. I'm not allowed in the pre-op this time. This time, Susan's brother and I are the only two people in the waiting room. The orchestra is playing now. Can barely make out the tune. Our song is Unchained Melody. We fell in love with it the first time we saw the movie Ghost. I think the orchestra is playing that song. There are people now gathering around the darkened back of the ballroom. They add a constant murmur to the background. It's everyone we've ever met, ever known, ever loved in the entire world, not just our kids and our family and our friends from now, but even generations from before us. And I wonder, whether that mass of people crunched around the darkened walls of the ballroom aren't also generations yet to come. I don't think anyone else recognizes the song, but I do. And I know that Susan will, and she will just love it. I'm expecting her to join me at any moment when all of a sudden the very last scene of the movie Ghost pops into my head. Last words of that movie, because I think they're going to be our Susan and my last words to each other, and I do believe that the love inside of you, you'll take it with you. Dr. Happy comes out. It doesn't take him very long this time. I'm not quite sure what to do. No, Melvin shouldn't hit this with me. This is my job. It's what I never wanted to do, what I was afraid to do, what I know I can do. It is how I will consummate my love. I am the other half of her home. I can do this. All of a sudden the orchestra stops playing before Susan is joining me. The musicians return their instruments to the cases as the walls of the ballroom are now empty and the lights come up ever so slightly, and I'm still standing by myself in the center of the dance floor. Musicians begin to exit the ballroom in front of me just as they entered, not acknowledging me, not reacting in any way, just seemingly off to the next appointment. And Susan and I have not danced the actual dance.